Every currency collapse begins with the same lie. That small changes don't matter. In 64 AD, if you held a Roman denarius in your hand, you held real money. 94% pure silver, minted under Emperor Nero's authority, stamped with imperial legitimacy, accepted from Britain to Egypt without question. The denarius wasn't just currency, it was a promise backed by something tangible, something that couldn't be conjured from nothing. But promises change when empires grow desperate. What happened next to Roman currency over the following 2 centuries reveals a pattern so consistent, so mathematically predictable, that once you understand it, you'll recognize it everywhere. Including right now, in systems we're told are different, modern, sophisticated. They're not different. They're following the exact same script. The Roman Empire at its height controlled 50 million people across 3 continents, roads spanning 50,000 miles, aqueducts that still function today, a legal system we reference in modern courts. This wasn't a primitive society stumbling through economic ignorance. Rome represented the pinnacle of ancient civilization, the most advanced economic system the world had ever seen. Yet, within 200 years, their currency became worthless bronze painted with silver wash, not through external invasion, not through natural disaster, through choices made by emperors who believed they could suspend economic reality through political will. The mathematics were simple then, just as they are now. When expenditures exceed revenue, something must give. Rome chose debasement over discipline. They chose gradual theft over immediate accountability. They chose to steal from their own citizens through monetary manipulation rather than face the political consequences of living within their means. Emperor Nero started the process, but he wasn't malicious. He faced the same impossible arithmetic every empire encounters in its expansion phase. Military campaigns cost enormous sums. Public works demanded constant funding. A bureaucracy spanning continents required payment. The Colosseum wasn't free. Neither were the legions guarding thousands of miles of frontier. So Nero made what seemed like a reasonable compromise. Reduce silver content from 94% to 90%. A small adjustment, barely noticeable. The coins looked identical. They felt the same. Citizens couldn't detect the difference. Trade continued normally. This is how monetary collapse begins, not with dramatic announcements or obvious changes, with adjustments so subtle they pass unnoticed until the pattern becomes irreversible. Emperor Trajan continued the process. Silver content dropped to 85%, then 80% under Hadrian. Each reduction seemed reasonable given the pressures each emperor faced. Barbarian threats required larger armies. Infrastructure projects demanded funding. Social programs needed expansion. The empire's appetite for resources grew faster than its ability to acquire them through legitimate means. Each emperor told himself the same story every debasing authority tells itself. This reduction is temporary, necessary, manageable. The economy will grow, revenues will increase, we'll restore full silver content when conditions improve. But conditions never improved because the fundamental problem, spending exceeding productive capacity, was never addressed. By the time Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, the denarius contained less than 70% silver. Citizens began noticing. Merchants started weighing coins more carefully. Foreign traders demanded assays before accepting Roman currency. The trust that had made the denarius the reserve currency of the ancient world was eroding coin by coin, emperor by emperor. But the real acceleration came in the 3rd century, during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. 50 emperors in 50 years, constant warfare, political chaos, economic breakdown, and through it all, the relentless debasement of currency as each desperate ruler printed his way out of immediate problems while creating larger long-term catastrophes. Emperor Caracalla increased soldiers' pay by 50% to maintain loyalty, funding the increase through further debasement. Emperor Gallienus reduced silver content to 5%. By the time Aurelian attempted reforms, the denarius contained virtually no silver at all, bronze coins washed with silver paint, the appearance of value without underlying substance. Prices responded exactly as economic theory predicts. Wheat that cost 8 denarii in the 2nd century cost 100 denarii by the 4th century, a 12-fold increase. Citizens watched their savings evaporate. Merchants refused debased coins. Soldiers demanded payment in goods rather than currency. The tax base collapsed because productivity couldn't keep pace with monetary expansion. This is what currency death looks like. Not a sudden crash, but a grinding erosion of purchasing power that accelerates until the monetary system simply stops functioning. The parallels to modern Western monetary systems are not coincidental, they're structural. The same pressures that broke Roman currency are breaking ours, following the same sequence, producing the same results. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. The Bretton Woods system, which had provided dollar convertibility since 1944, ended overnight, not through careful planning or international agreement, but through emergency decree. The United States had printed more dollars than it had gold to back them. Foreign nations, particularly France under Charles de Gaulle, had begun demanding gold for their dollar holdings. Nixon faced the same choice Roman emperors faced: disciplined spending or debased currency. He chose debasement. What followed was 50 years of gradual dollar erosion disguised as monetary sophistication. The Federal Reserve, like Roman emperors, told itself each expansion was temporary, necessary, manageable. Quantitative easing 1, quantitative easing 2, quantitative easing 3, Operation Twist. Each program larger than the last, each justified by immediate crisis while creating conditions for larger future crises. The Fed's balance sheet expanded from $800 billion in 2008 to $9 trillion by 2022. An 11-fold increase in 14 years. Rome took 2 centuries to achieve similar debasement ratios. Modern central banks accomplished the same destruction in a decade and a half. But just as Roman citizens couldn't immediately detect reduced silver content, American citizens couldn't immediately feel the effects of massive monetary expansion. The mechanisms are different, but the delay pattern is identical. Newly created currency flows first into asset markets, stocks, bonds, real estate, creating the illusion of prosperity while the underlying purchasing power slowly erodes. Roman merchants eventually learned to test coins for silver content. Modern citizens are learning to test currency for purchasing power. Housing costs that consume 25% of income now consume 50%. Education costs have increased 1,200% since 1980. Healthcare costs triple every generation. These aren't separate problems. They're symptoms of currency debasement expressing itself through different sectors. The Roman government responded to price increases with price controls, just as modern governments respond with regulation and subsidy programs that address symptoms while ignoring causes. Neither approach works because neither addresses the fundamental imbalance between currency creation and productive output. What happened to Rome's middle class during currency collapse mirrors what's happening to Western middle classes today. Citizens who saved in denarii watched their wealth evaporate. Those who held land, productive assets, or foreign currency preserved purchasing power. Wealth concentrated among asset owners while currency holders grew impoverished. Modern data shows identical patterns. Household savings rates have declined steadily since the 1970s, not because people became less disciplined, but because holding currency guarantees loss. Asset prices have increased far beyond wage growth, not because assets became more productive, but because currency became less valuable. The wealth gap widens not through exploitation, but through monetary physics. Central banks face the same impossible arithmetic Roman emperors faced. Interest rates below inflation rates constitute negative real returns, encouraging borrowing and discouraging saving. But raising rates to positive real levels makes government debt service impossible. National debt exceeding $38 trillion cannot be serviced at historically normal interest rates. The choice becomes hyperinflation through continued expansion or default through honest pricing. History provides the answer. Governments always choose gradual theft over immediate accountability. Always, without exception. The Roman Empire didn't collapse because barbarians were stronger. It collapsed because monetary debasement destroyed the economic foundation that supported military strength. Soldiers wouldn't fight for worthless coins. Farmers wouldn't produce for currency that lost value faster than crops could grow. Citizens wouldn't support a system that systematically impoverished them through hidden taxation. Modern parallels extend beyond economics into social consequences. Roman citizens lost faith in institutions that destroyed their savings through monetary manipulation. Political extremism rose as traditional solutions failed, social cohesion fractured along economic lines. Sound familiar? The final phase of Roman monetary collapse involved complete abandonment of the official currency. Citizens reverted to barter, commodity exchange, and foreign currencies. Trade networks fragmented. Economic complexity collapsed to sustainable levels, but at enormous cost in living standards and social organization. We're witnessing early stages of similar abandonment today. Central bank digital currencies represent attempts to maintain monetary control through technological force. Capital controls restrict wealth movement. Alternative currencies gain adoption. International trade increasingly bypasses traditional dollar settlement. These aren't random developments. They're predictable responses to monetary system failure. The Roman precedent teaches us that currency collapse doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds over generations, so gradually that each stage seems normal to those living through it. Citizens adapt to higher prices, reduced purchasing power, increased government intervention. They accept diminished expectations as natural rather than systemic, until they don't. Until the gap between official statements and lived reality becomes too obvious to ignore. Until the choice becomes accepting impoverishment or finding alternatives. Rome's silver started disappearing in 64 AD with a 4% reduction that seemed insignificant. 2 centuries later, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. The currency death preceded political collapse by decades, creating conditions that made everything else inevitable. Modern Western currencies began dying in 1971 with gold window closure that seemed like temporary emergency measure. 50 years later, we're approaching the phase where even official statistics cannot hide the debasement effects. The pattern doesn't change. Only the timeline varies, and the timeline is accelerating because modern monetary expansion happens at digital speed rather than Roman administrative pace. Currency collapse isn't a future event we might avoid through better policy. It's a present reality we're living through, disguised by statistical manipulation and institutional denial. The silver started disappearing decades ago. We're just beginning to notice.